So we are live on the webinar.
A very warm welcome and good afternoon to everyone.
Nymphia, you may like to give a 30-second pause because participants' screen is just shooting up. They'll all take time to.
Sure, Sanjay. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. We have. Wow. Yes. We have 136 participants already on the call. So Nymphia, yes, you may kickstart. Yes.
A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to our chief guest, esteemed panelist, panel chair, and members of the insurance and reinsurance industry for making time today for this virtual event. As a part of the knowledge series organized by Guy Carpenter and Marsh during the Indian Rendezvous, which we are doing virtually this time, we bring today the important topic of protection gap in India and the role of reinsurance. I request Sanjay Kedia, CEO and Country Head, Marsh India, to welcome the audience and open the event. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Nymphia. Mr. G. Srinivasan, Director, National Insurance Academy. Sri Srivastav of GIC, Chairman and Managing Director, Mr. Tripathi, Chairman, Managing Director of United India, and all the seniors, panelists, and participants. A very warm welcome to this webinar on bridging the protection gap in India and role of reinsurance. We all know protection gap is simply what is the economic loss and what is the insured loss, a gap between the two. Interestingly, even at a global level, various studies points out only a protection of only, and the gap in India, we all know, is much bigger. And the role of reinsurance, which is the capital provider, is humongous, given the scale of protection which needs to be extended. We have such amazing and senior panelists. I believe we should get maximum time from them. And of course, a lot of question answers from all of you so that we have an engaging session. With this, I wish this webinar a great success and hand over back to Nymphia Batra, leader of Guy Carpenter in India. Yes, Nymphia, over to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thanks for kickstarting the discussions. And I now request Tony Gallagher, Regional CEO for Guy Carpenter Asia Pacific, to share his welcome inputs with our distinguished guests and attendees. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks very much, Nymphia. It's certainly a pleasure to be here at the Indian Rendezvous, once again virtually for the second year. And throughout the world, many of these conferences have been virtual, which does a couple of things. One, it gives us a huge ability to be able to communicate in some ways with a broader audience and to bring the ideas of different perspectives. And in this particular discussion, along with the knowledge series, we're always looking to try and learn something and bring something new to the business. And when we look at topics at Guy Carpenter and at Marsh, we look at topics which are important to the industry. This year and last year more than ever, the protection gap has become more and more evident when we think about the pandemic. In prior years, the protection gap has become very evident when we talk about natural perils and then if you go back a few more years around terrorism in terms of the ability for the industry to be able to pay the losses. So as an industry, our job and what we try to do when we look at everything that occurs is to put the insured back in the position that they were prior to a loss. And so we want policyholders to buy insurance and to provide coverage so that we can put the individuals back in the position that they were before a loss. And that's the goal of an industry, and that's the goal that we, as Guy Carpenter and Marsh, want to ensure that all of our clients are in those positions. The protection gap offers a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for the industry, it's a challenge for the economy, and to ensure that can be put back in the position that it was before a loss. So the timing of this couldn't be better. Over the last 2 years, we've talked about the protection gap in various forums. We've talked about it across different countries. And looking at the pandemic today, it's a topic that is more important than ever. And when you look into the future, certainly as I look at it, it's something that we must address. But in this forum, I'm sure there are many hurdles and obstacles in terms of closing that protection gap and ensuring that it doesn't exist. So I'm looking forward to participating with the panel here, and I'm looking forward to hearing any questions that you may have. And this forum today is really a stepping stone in terms of future discussions and future ideas, which we look forward to support along with the industry and along with India as a whole, to ensure that this doesn't become an issue of the future. So look forward to the ongoing discussion. Thanks very much, Nymphia.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for those insights. As mentioned by Sanjay and Tony both, the protection gap is indeed an important concern confronting us today. And the reinsurance industry certainly has a critical role to play in providing capital and ensuring technical assistance to the insurance industry as well as the society as a whole. Climate action failure and NatCat events were the two top critical risks in the latest Global Risk Report of 2022, which was published by the World Economic Forum. Without further ado, I now request and introduce our chief guest for today, Shri Devesh Srivastav Sir, Chairman and Managing Director, GIC Re, to deliver the special address. Devesh Sir is known to all of us here, and for the benefit of those who don't, Sir has an illustrious career in the insurance industry since 1987 and worked in various assignments both in India and overseas. He was a key player in setting up GIC Re in Lloyd's Syndicate 1947 in London, and also headed up the GIC UK branch prior to his current role as the Chairman Managing Director for GIC Re. Devesh Sir, we thank you again for your kind presence at this webinar. The audience, as are us, eagerly awaiting to hear your thoughts. Over to you, Devesh Sir.
Thanks very much, ma'am, and good afternoon, everyone. I really wouldn't know how illustrious that is, but well, thanks nonetheless. A protection gap, as Mr. Kedia very correctly mentioned, classically is defined as the difference between the economic losses and the insured losses. But when we as reinsurers, or even in fact as insurers, when we speak about the protection gap, is that the only thing that should be bothering us? I fear not. It is also the gap between the policies we sell and the desire of the individual to purchase something that we are possibly either unable to provide, or we have not been able to price it correctly, that it becomes daunting for the person to buy that policy. But certainly a huge gap exists. And as risk management's principles take credence and become more a norm than anything else, these risks are being identified and they need mitigation. And sooner rather than later, I feel boards are going to look at these risks very, very carefully and then compel the management to get into acts by which they can, bridge this protection gap and fill in. COVID has been a very marvelous example of what the world had desired. We all know how the BI losses were not paid in India, at least in the absence of PD. But surely there is a huge market that is waiting there for BI on a standalone basis in the absence of PD, possibly triggered by something like COVID. We have seen so many examples in the West, including Europe and US, especially the US, where payouts have happened. But then if we haven't really factored in the price, it becomes very, very challenging for reinsurers. In fact, a certain study did say that about 30% of the RI capital of the world will be wiped out if we were to start entertaining these BI losses in the absence of PD, because possibly we never bargained for a standalone BI in the absence of PD. So these things are there. But the important part today is also how will reinsurers step in and do something to fill in this protection gap. Well, yes, we do have deep pockets, at least we are supposed to have deep pockets, but that also gives us a chance to hold the hand of our cedents. If somebody is trying to go a certain way with the expertise that we have from so many angles that we see risks, we can possibly help that cedent into going further on and trying to fill that protection gap, chart a new course, think of a new product where something that has not been done before is done. And in fact, even if it is being done in a small way, we know the example of Wimbledon, where in fact Marsh only was the broker. you did manage that cover for Wimbledon for a very long time. And when COVID did hit the country and Wimbledon had to be postponed, they did get a very healthy payout as well, which ensured that their balance sheet did not suffer. So these are the gaps that need to be identified. I mean, the 3 C's that I would say currently that are plaguing the world, of course, the first C is COVID. The second C is cyber, which is a big one. And the third most important for us as reinsurers, the climate change. That is something that we have to start, feathering our nest very much in the present now to look at the future. So with this, I feel I have tried to tell my mind at least about what the protection gap according to us ought to be, and not limited to the traditional classical definition of a protection gap. I really look forward to the deliberations that is going to be happening at the panel now, and wish this entire event a big success. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Devesh sir. It's always wonderful to hear you, and your thoughts were very relevant, and some of the points you raised do leave a lot for the panel and us to think about. So thank you for sharing everything you did, sir. Before we move into the panel discussion, we wanted to take a minute and check the pulse of the audience with a few poll questions here. These poll questions point out to the protection gap from a global as well as an Indian context. So let's have the questions, please. The first question is, what is the approximate gap between the economic and insured losses in India in the last 5 years? We can see that around 65% of the audience feel that the number is between 80% to 90%, which is quite glaring. Can we have the next question, please? Which is the most impactful natural cat event causing insured losses in India? Flood, earthquake, or tsunami? We can see the House is very much opinionated that flood is the very impactful NatCat event, which is happening with the frequency and severity that we all are seeing these days. Thanks. We can move to the next question, please. What are the estimated amount of losses to the global economy from extreme NatCat natural disaster events over the past 40 years? USD 1 trillion, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, or 4 trillion? Again, we can see a large part of the audience feel that the number is between 3 to 4 trillion. Thank you. We can move to the next slide, please. So as we saw from the polls, and if we look at the reports and the numbers, the statistics show that the economic losses from the disasters easily are in the range of $250 to $300 billion a year. This is based on the Global Assessment Report for Disaster Risk Reduction. $4 trillion is the estimated figure that is lost to extreme natural disasters over the past 40 years. The third question in the polls. As Tony touched upon, the Reinsurance Capital, currently we are looking at about $534 billion based on Guy Carpenter and AM Best estimates, and this includes the traditional as well as alternative capital, which goes to show the role of that reinsurance can play if we were to cover these uninsured and economic losses. Next one, please. If we look at it from an Indian context, India is witnessing an increasing trend of NatCat events. The economic impact of these disasters is not only significant, but the protection gap, as you can see, the difference between the economic and insured losses is glaring. These are some of the latest events that have happened in the Indian context. We can move to the next one, please. The panel today will touch upon various aspects of acuteness of the protection gap issue, the demand side issues, the role of the government, alternative capital, innovative PPP solutions, and some of these that we see on this slide are success stories of what has happened across the world, wherein government has stepped in to support the vulnerable sections and provide key solutions to the current challenges of protection gap, both pre and post disasters. So whether it is the Caribbean Cat Risk Insurance Facility or the Flood Re as an example, there are a host of these examples which the panel will deliberate upon. The role of academia in an issue of protection gap is truly significant while addressing this topic. And we now take this opportunity to welcome Shri G. Srinivasan Sir, Director, National Insurance Academy, Pune, to chair our panel discussion. Mr. Srinivasan Sir is currently serving as the Director NIA. Prior to this, he has a rich experience of over 39 years in the non-life industry, where he served as the CMD for New India for 6 years, prior to which he was the CMD for United India for 5 years, and prior to that he was the New India CMD in Trinidad in the Caribbean for a little over 4 years. He holds several board positions in India and abroad. I also take this opportunity to introduce now our key panelists for the panel discussion. Shri Satyajit Tripathi, Chairman and Managing Director, United India Insurance, which is the second largest non-life insurance. His extensive and vast experience ranges from investment, crop, motor, marine, HR, training, investor relations at GIC and New India, prior to joining as the CMD for United India. Mr. P.C. Kanpal, Managing and Director, CEO for SBI General Insurance, has been with SBI since 1987 and has a vast experience in retail, IT, HR, overseas operations of SBI Bank. Mr. Hari Riachi, CEO, Swiss Re India Branch, responsible for Swiss Re's reinsurance business in India, overseeing all products and solutions for P&C, life and health, innovative, non-traditional and public sector solutions. He was head North Africa, based in Zurich, and leading the development of Swiss Re's reinsurance business in the region. Mr. Parag Gupta, Chief Underwriting Officer, SCOR SE India Branch and Global Head, Motor Extended Warranty and Automobile Affinity Business, SCOR SE India Branch. In his career spanning over 3 decades, he's held various leadership positions in the GI industry and recently designated as the CEO for SCOR India Branch, which he will take over in a few days from now. Mr. Tom Graham, Head of Regional Treaty Development, Chaucer. Tom is based in Singapore and the Head of Treaty for Asia, MENA and Australia Pacific regions. He has over 20 years of experience in reinsurance markets in Singapore and London. Mr. Tony Gallagher, Regional CEO, Guy Carpenter Asia Pacific. Tony is responsible for strengthening the company's market position across Asia Pac and enhancing the service capabilities in regions covering Australasia, Greater China, India, Japan, Korea and Southeast Asia. Tony has over 25 years experience in Gen Re and Guy Carpenter and has worked extensively in UK, Australia and Japanese markets. We are very thankful to the panelists for their time and the support extended. And I now hand over to Srinivasan Sir to moderate the panel discussions. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Nymphia and Sanjay, for this opportunity. Compliment Guy Carpenter and Marsh for discussing a very, very important theme, protection gap in India. So dear friends, it's a great opportunity for all of us to really deliberate on this important theme. I must compliment the audience for the right answers. The answers were brilliant. Shows we have a very knowledgeable audience listening to this webinar. Also very interesting data points given by Nymphia in her short presentation. Friends, as all of us know, protection gap is a serious global issue. If people are not adequately insured, the very purpose of having insurance products, insurance schemes, not going to benefit people whenever they suffer any losses or unfortunate incidents. The size of global protection gap is very, very big. I have a number of some $162.5 billion US. But the problem is most of it is in the case of emerging economies. The situation in India is quite acute. All of us know that in case of natural catastrophes, we just saw some numbers. The protection gap is as high as 90%. And India today is repeatedly being attacked by NatCat events. Today, we have at least 3 to 4 cyclones, both on the East Coast as well as the West Coast. West Coast never used to have cyclones in the past. While, protection gap is a serious issue, penetration levels, as we know, is very, very low. Especially non-life, it's just about 1%. So a lot of work needs to be done on the direct side. Obviously, we need to increase insurance awareness, bring innovative products which provide relief to the people, increase affordability, have better distribution strategies, and finally, very importantly, bridge the trust deficit. So people really understand that insurance can come to the rescue if there is a problem. But the role of reinsurance is also very, very high. Reinsurers can clearly bring new products, new solutions, new strategies, really help the market to bridge the protection gap to a very large extent. So this webinar, this panel, is really going to focus on this important issue, role of reinsurance in bridging the protection gap. We have very eminent panelists with diverse backgrounds, both from direct side, reinsurance side, India and abroad. I'm sure that the deliberations would really throw a lot of information and solutions to the market. So with this, let me start the panel discussion. The job of the moderator is always very, very easy because just ask questions. It's the panelists who will come out with their interesting solutions and answers. Let me start with Hadi. With your global experience and also Indian experience as a reinsurer, would like to start the panel by asking this question. We all know that protection gap is a global issue, not only in India but also in many parts of the world. So, do you think that the demand side is a problem? People are not really taking policies. People are not really availing the insurance products. If so, how do we really, sort out this issue? How do we increase the demand? Adi?
Good afternoon, Mr. Srinivasan, and good afternoon to everyone and all of our participants. Really happy to be part of the discussion today. I think the theme is very topical, and clearly the times that we're in, highlight the importance of the protection gap and the need and the role that our industry plays to be able to address it. A year ago, I think it would have been hard for us to imagine that we'll be here, having to face yet another big global wave of COVID and the pandemic. And I think this is a starking reminder of, I think, for all of us on some of the challenges that we face, and also it's highlighting, and I'd say it's actually putting under stress the global protection gap. So, I think Tony referred to it in the opening. The reality is that the pandemic has even, first created divergences across the economies and put more pressure on various parts of the economy, showing actually that protection gaps across the pillars of our industry is growing. So when we think of and maybe I'll just talk in the context of India and paint a picture a little bit before we talk about, some of the challenges. But, our latest survey around, mortality protection gap shows that almost 84% of Indian households do not have appropriate protection when it comes to life and, to the main bread earner and breadwinner. Our statistics on health show that the protection gap in India on health insurance is north of $200 billion. And then we just had a survey now, and I think all participants clearly identified when it comes to the non-life, there's on the Nat Cat particularly a significant protection gap there, where less than 10% of economic losses resulting from Nat Cat events are actually insured. And I think this really highlights some of the challenges that we will need to address as an industry. And so I think in the question, you said if it's a question of demand. I think it's there's a combination of factors there that we probably need to contemplate. Probably a starting point when we think, and certainly when I look at us, really giving it a go at closing this protection gap and working as an industry, I like to think of the 3 A's. And one is being the awareness, one is being the availability or accessibility of insurance, and one is being the affordability of insurance. And perhaps the demand is actually the closest one to the first A, which is around awareness. And I just talked about a lot of the challenges that the pandemic brought upon us and the stress it's putting on the protection gap. But the reality as well is that the pandemic brought 2 very positive paradigm shifts. And one is around awareness. And so the pandemic has definitely helped to increase the awareness around insurance, the importance of it, have really underlined the individual protection needs, and probably individuals are more actively looking to fulfill these needs. And so I think that's a positive that we need to build on and continue. I think there's a lot that we can do as an industry around awareness, but also in partnership with other industries, in partnership with other sectors to be able to raise that awareness. The second positive paradigm shift is actually around digitalization. And I think it would have been hard to imagine that we would have been in such a space today of consumers, and even our industry, have been able to digitalize so quickly. As we have done in the past 2 years, and that really hopefully will help to address, and we can talk about it later today, I'm sure it's going to come up, but will help to close the issues around accessibility and affordability of the protection, which is around the 3 A's. So I think overall, like I said, there are, if I'm to just kind of bring it together for our participants tuning in today, I think currently the environment that we're living in is highlighting, a stress and a widening protection gap is what we're seeing. I think demand is one element. Clearly, it's improving, awareness is increasing, but there's also an element of us as an industry, pitching in to providing more accessible and more affordable products. And hopefully throughout the discussion today, we'll be able to highlight how as reinsurers, but also as insurers, we're able to do that.
Thank you, Hadi. I think you through 3 A's. We had 3 C's from Devesh just a little earlier. I now go to Mr. Tripathi. Mr. Tripathi, the penetration in the non-life was about 0.6 20 years back. Just moved to 1. And largely in the last 2 years, because probably the economy has not really grown well, not that insurance has really, grown very fast. And the city you come from, where you're headquartered, Chennai, repeatedly faces floods. We see huge protection gap. So what do you think is the insurance direct side as well as reinsurers can really play in bridging the protection gap? What are your views on that?
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be part of this panel discussion. My sense is the protection gap has always remained in the Indian market, in the global market also. The point which I'm alluding to right now is that the gap is increasing more and more. The pace of capital infusion plus the ability to underwrite a risk plus the protection gap, there seem to be in recent years, because of huge number of natural catastrophe, the pace of this gap is increasing. I will bring to the notice of all that in the year 2019, close to 400 global natural catastrophes happened, for which the loss was around 235 billion. And the insured amount was close to around 72 to 73 billion, clearly showing the fact that the gap remains something like 160 to 170 billion for past 4 to 5 years. Recent years, if we look into in the Indian context, since the other panelists have also alluded to this fact that the number of natural calamities are increasing. If I bring to your notice the fact that if we take 100 years experience in the Indian subcontinent, on a decadal basis, the incidence of drought has doubled. If you look from 1900 to 1980, 85, the incidence of drought was close to 1 or 2 in 10-year period, which has gone up to at least 4 now. Now, the damage caused by drought is much more significant in the Indian context than flood. Now, what can the insurers and reinsurers do? You cannot overnight make an attempt to bridge this gap. It is not possible. There has to be a calibrated approach to see that we infuse capital so that we are able to write the risk to the extent that we intend to write. Now, if we look into the past 2 years, COVID has also put a spanner into all these kind of arrangements. Even that protection gap is significant. Even now, after 2 years and after literally all companies giving all kinds of covers, there is still a significant amount of gap. So the major approach from insurers and direct companies will be to be ready for future with adequate capital, protecting their own solvency, and offering such products which are actually desired and wanted by the general public. In all kinds of health policies that you have in India, all kinds of protections are given. Still, we find that there is scope for further improvement also. So my submission would be to have adequate capital infusion in a calibrated approach to meet this protection gap in the Indian context. That will evidently flow into the global context also.
Thank you, Mr. Tripathi. I think you very rightly underlined the need of capital. I think which is where the reinsurers I think can play a very important role in bringing in required by the insurers to really bridge the protection gap. I go to Mr. Parag now. Parag, I mean, with your experience in the global markets and also in the reinsurance industry, I mean, what is it that India can learn from international experiences in terms of strategies to reduce the protection gap? The Western markets have done reasonably well. Even emerging economies, some of them have done very well. India seems to be far behind. What could be the learnings from the international market?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Srinivasan. In the beginning, Mr. Devesh mentioned about CCC, and in CCC, the cyber and COVID, I would say they are emerging risks. Still, we are learning. While climate change is something which all of us are exposed to today, and we across the globe, we can see how the impact is happening. And this is something which we used to believe as insurer and reinsurers that we have developed various models, and this is something which we understand well. Now, if we start talking about India, the learning, I think it's very important to have, somewhere the temperature check. And for India, how the climate is impacting us. And I would like to share, some figures. And it's not about the frequency of the cat events which we are exposed to, but rather about what's the underlying things, how the climate change is impacting us. So, as you know, average temperature of India has risen by 0.7 degrees centigrade during 1901 to 2018. And this is projected to rise by 2.7% by 2099. And this is the best case scenario. If I talk about the worst case scenario, it could be as high as 4.4 degrees centigrade. And we understand that every single degree centigrade, how it affects the frequency of event or the severity of the cat event. Sea level in Mumbai and the Bengal coast are rising at a rate of approximately 3 centimeter and 5 centimeter per decade, respectively, and projected to rise to 30 centimeter by 2099. Temperature of Indian Ocean, be it Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, has increased by 1 degree centigrade during 1951 to 2015, which is higher than the global average. And the summer monsoon has declined by 6% in the Western Ghats, and it is projected that this will result in drought and extreme rainfall. More frequent dry spells we see, maybe 27% higher during 1981 to 2011, and if I compare with 51 to 80, and more intense wet spell. And in fact, all of us are experiencing it now. So India is very much experiencing these, the impact of the climate change. And if I take the learning from the global markets, and instead of the Western market, because their challenges are different, rather, I would like to look at the emerging economies, would like to focus there. And as Mr. Srinivasan rightly mentioned, that even there are some good examples there. So various countries have tried to find out, the various solutions, like there are Caribbean cat risk pool, Turkey earthquake insurance pool, Romania earthquake pool, or we have Philippine catastrophe pool, and maybe the African risk capacity. So there are various examples, and each one is to address a particular kind of a challenge which we face. And I would like to just touch base here a couple of them, because they provide a different kind of a protection, or they try to provide a different kind of a solution. First one I would like to talk about is Philippine city disaster insurance pool. And so as all of us we know, so Philippine is located in one of the world's most disaster prone regions. It is exposed to earthquake, it is exposed to volcanic eruptions or to severe typhoons. And country has also experienced flood, drought, and landslide. So, and this is typically a learning on, the how a government can take the initiatives to enhance disaster resilience. And these initiatives are one side on the to how the risk can be reduced, and other side how to strengthen the financial preparedness for potential events. It's a classic example of this. And for that purpose, actually in Philippines, there was a Philippine disaster city disaster insurance pool was introduced. And this was essentially, so there this is the solution, a parametric solution pool, and parametric solution was identified as the best to really to suit it. And parametric insurance payouts are determined based on the physical feature of a natural hazard event. If it's a wind, or then it's the wind speed for the typhoon, or ground shaking for earthquake, and it's rather than the actual losses suffered by the policyholder. So we will say that basis risk is always there, where in a parametric cover you indemnify, or an indemnity based cover, but they try to address it by way of the considering the most closely correlated to actual losses, and they considered the parameters based on that, and this pool was worked out. So they are actually, the cities are also very much involved into disaster resilience, and they have local disaster risk management and development fund. And generally, if any disaster is there, they use this fund. But what they realize is this fund is never enough. So now some cities are identified there, maybe 10 cities are identified there. And these cities are, and this pool is acting as an insurance company for them, and providing the protection to these cities. Cities, depending on the fund available with them, they buy the cover, and based on that, the coverage is arranged. And accordingly, the reinsurance protections are also arranged for the pool. And so this is one example on the where the sovereign coverage. Other side, the classic example for the individual coverage is a Turkish catastrophe insurance pool, which is working very well for last almost 2 decades. And this is essentially, it's for residential dwelling, which are earthquake cover for the residential dwelling, which are located within municipality boundaries, are required to buy the compulsory earthquake insurance coverage. Though it's compulsory, but it's still, maybe the penetration is not 100%. And but yeah, I think the concept is the compulsory insurance for the registered properties. And this is managed by the Turkish catastrophe insurance pool. which is a non-profit public entity which is affiliated with the Ministry of Estate. And initially it was funded by the World Bank, but now developed the based on the premiums and development of that. Actually, they have arranged the funds on that. So there are various advantages if you look at it. So this pool is in a position to, number one is to provide the insurance protection and definitely increasing the protection, improving the protection gap. Other side, this pool is definitely, it's also, increasing the awareness, because as Heidi mentioned, so one is awareness, three important A's: awareness, availability, and affordability. So actually this pool is addressing all these three issues. This is helping in the awareness. This pool is helping in the, because of the diversification, it's in a position to provide the affordability also, and at the same time, it's availability of a standard, the earthquake insurance product is there. Now the discussions are to extend it to other perils also. So these are the two classic examples. And what I believe is, one example, India is a vast country. We are very large. So one example or one kind of a learning may not help us, while I think various initiatives are required, and we may have to focus on them.
Thank you, Parag. I think for very, very interesting solutions you have really given us. Hopefully the authorities will look at it and start implementing it. You spoke about climate risk, which is very, very relevant for India. So with this, I will go to Mr. Kanpal. Mr. Kanpal, we see natural catastrophes, floods. Every Indian city today is a work in progress. A lot of losses, and the persons who are affected are people who are middle class, vulnerable sections of society. So do you think that, NatCat insurance should be made compulsory, or some way wherein everyone gets coverage for NatCat perils? What do you think the role of regulator? Regulator also has a very important role in making sure that everyone is insured. So what could be the role of regulator and also government in terms of ensuring that everyone has a catastrophe?
Yeah, good afternoon. And before I take up this question, I would like to thank Guy Carpenter and Marsh for including me in this panel discussion. Very interesting discussion, and all industry experts are there. So I would like to change, rather put the question in two parts. One is whether the government should make NatCat mandatory, NatCat insurance mandatory. So see, we had been talking about the major challenges which we are facing in terms of huge protection gap for quite some time. I think industry had been talking about it for last 20 years. And in many reports, we hear that, see, the losses, economic losses, are to the extent of $15 to $20 billion per annum in India itself. What to talk of globally, because I was going through one figure which says that $4 trillion in the last 40 years, which is huge sum. But what needs to be done immediately is that, see, we'll have to change the narrative. The narrative should change from protection gap to how economic losses are impacting everybody. The first stakeholder is the government. So if there are losses of $20 billion, $100 billion, who is paying for that? If there is a protection gap of 90%, 10% rehabilitation is done by insurance companies. 90% rehabilitation, who is doing? And there are kind of perils which we never know. I do not know whether we are counting all kind of economic losses, because see, floods, many of the floods go unreported. People are suffering losses, businesses are suffering losses, even the government assets are suffering losses. Because we often talk about the bigger cyclones and bigger events. We do not talk about the small events, even the drought, how the drought is impacting, how the earthquake is really impacting, how the cyclones are impacting, and how this change of weather, climate, which Mr. Parag Gupta was saying, how it is going to impact the whole, and how we can rehabilitate the whole community very fast. So government needs to be told that the government is investing this money which could have been utilized for the creation of institutions. If there is $20 billion loss in a particular year, so that money could have been utilized for building institutions. the money will go from our pockets, definitely, because see, ultimately the government will collect through the taxes, but that could have been utilized in a productive manner had the protection gap been lower. Now it's government's responsibility to create awareness. And why awareness is poor today? Because there are 3-4 reasons which I think many of my previous speakers have already talked about. But the biggest problem today of awareness, lack of awareness, is that they do not take insurance as a medium to protect their risk. They are thinking that is to waste of expenditure. Unless government intervenes and helps us in creating the right awareness for this, we will not be able to penetrate more. So making a pool is easy. But see, government can go like Mr. Parag was saying, Philippine city disaster pool, they are much advanced. Here, many of the cities suffer a lot of natural climatic events and losses because of that. Making that pool within that city or within that county will be very difficult. So India should have a pan-India pool for doing those things. Rather, why create a pool? Why not let insurers and reinsurers have this kind of the more penetration and more premium so that they can meet those things? I'm little against creating a pool and handing it in the hands of the government authorities. Reason being, they have got a lot of other exigencies, and many a times it happens. If you go go back to the history, they have created many pools by applying cess on many of the taxes. But where does that money go, or whether they are staying with the government only or gets utilized for something else is a question. So let core function should do its job. So insurance, it's the insurance job, that insurance company's job, that they should meet these and rehabilitate the communities which suffer because of these natural climatic events, and help them in getting back to their feet. So this is one part of mine. So I feel that not only they should make it mandatory in the form of, say, some cess in the home insurance, or for the businesses, or for the individual's health, and leave it to the insurance companies instead of creating a pool. I am not in favor of having a pool in the hands of. Second question was about the role of regulator in encouraging innovative ideas. If you look at the sandbox, which initiative regulator started, so that at least created some kind of innovation in the industry, and many new products were filed. Although, say, during the initial stages, where I think people were more skeptical about whether these things will get approved or not. So the full innovation ideas could not get submitted to the regulator, but they play a key role in terms of creating a conducive environment for proposing innovative ideas. Rather, regulators should nudge insurance companies to think and take measures to increase the penetration of insurance products. I think the right platform, if they provide, the insurance companies, along with the support of reinsurers also, will be able to come out with many products, which Hedy was saying, that affordability and availability, these things, these two aspects can be very well addressed by this.
Thank you, Mr. Kanpal, for your very clear ideas on the role of government and the regulator. Tom, I come to you now. We were talking about, I'm bringing this 3 C's again and again. It's very aptly said by Devesh at the beginning of this program. We have the protection gap in climate risk, cyber, crop, pandemic. So do you think, what should be the focus of India, looking from a different market? what do you think that India should really focus in bridging the protection gap quickly?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Can hear you.
Just thank Nymphy and the Guy Carpenter team for the opportunity to speak at this distinguished event. I recognise the skill and esteemed panel I'm talking alongside, and of course yourself, Mr. Shrisaran, our Honourable Chair. I hope we can see each other soon. I hope all my friends on this call are well. If I could start with a joke, I'll start with a fantastic quote that a cyber underwriter in Singapore told me last year. There were two neighbours talking to each other once during one of Singapore's frequent storms. The first one looked up and saw water streaming down the side of his neighbour's living room. And he turned around and he said to his neighbour, "Your roof is leaking. Why don't you fix it?" The other neighbour looked at him blankly and replied as if asked a stupid question. "I can't fix it when it's raining, and when it's raining, it doesn't leak." And I think this gets to the heart of the issue. I don't know whether that's a true quote or not, but it seems like it could well be. It's a huge question, and it's important to frame this properly. But in short, I'm afraid that I think the problem remains very much at the foot of the traditional lines. But I will offer some thoughts on this, some interesting areas where we've seen some development in and of personal interest to me as well. Again, we should talk about the reasons behind the large protection gap, which exists in many parts of Asia, not just in India. I think we do a disservice when we say the Indian insurance market is behind other areas. In my experience as an Asian underwriter, I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I think it's the world leader in particular in some areas. But we should compare it against countries that have made huge steps. If we take Australia, which has one of the highest insurance penetration rates in the world, and we compare this to India during a normal catastrophe event, we pick a catastrophe event because it's easier to compare, we can see that in Australia, we would normally expect to see somewhere between 65 and 80% of the economic damage alleviated by insurance. Again, lots of people have quoted the figure. I'm not sure what the exact right number is, but this compares to that typical penetration rate of somewhere around that 5% mark in India. I think it depends on the event, where it is, and so on and so forth. So we can see that this can be bridged. Australia wasn't always at 60–75%. It was at 5% at some point in its development. And you know, so we should have a look at why that is the case. So the thing is to acknowledge that we're not going to close that gap fully until insurance becomes a wider form of effectively an economic resilience protection acceptable to the Indian people and the wider business community. Simply put, people don't spend enough on insurance. This penetrate will always hold the most important elements of closing any gap. An emphasis on risk management as a way of living, as many corporate enterprises are showing in their increased sophistication and resilience through insurance purchasing, but also through other awareness and risk management measures. So convincing our friends and families that insurance is more than a cost, and it is therefore key, whether it is property, cyber, marine, health, you name the class. It's our job to make this affordable, sustainable, and more widely available. So I see using technology to simplify claims processes, I think that's been touched on before, and reforming distribution channels to make sales easier as two major areas of investment where I see India has a particular advantage, both in its leading technological solutions, but also for a really smart and young population. It's a country open to trying new ideas. And I've certainly seen in my travels some of the smartest insurance companies in the entire region being based in India and trying to think about these problems. I often get asked to talk about parametric covers. Parametric covers present really interesting solutions, and its primary benefit is completely simplifying and massively speeding up the claim settlement process. Again, the reinsurance industry so far has had more success in these larger corporate protections, in agriculture and with government schemes, but its impact in core lines is still small. Having said that, we're seeing literally dozens of insurtechs a year just at little old Chaucer. And in almost every proposal, I see advances in the pricing and product design. But as of yet, I haven't seen them go mainstream, partially due to customer confusion, but also distribution. However, more positively, we have recently seen deductible buy-downs, micro-parametric, non-cat weather, renewable power supply as successful areas of parametric penetration, and quite big actually. So going back to one of Hadi's points, the awareness is growing, and I really love the efficiency and transparency of this. Other areas I'd like to see serious investment in is non-tangible economic loss. At Chaucer, we recently supported a consortium in the US ensuring reputational risk. It's a small start, but it's a massive area of protection gap. It's not just the cost of the physical loss, it's the cost of the economic loss as well. We've tried to sell lots of revenue products. Somewhat ironically, and I'm happy to admit this, I guess, we started selling a hotel revenue loss product 8 months before COVID took its toll. I guess fortunately for us, we probably only sold about 6 policies before the pandemic hit, which only shows my point about that quote I said about the roof leaking. There's a massive customer gap still. When it comes to other classes like cyber especially, it's hard. The market hasn't got cyber right yet, even in the highly developed and regulated US market, and the penetration is still really low. The changing nature of this risk is unique, but we will grow and learn in a small amount of time. So that being said, you know, we can see areas where this is growing, and I'll go back to this. I've talked at Marsh and Guy Carpenter panels before, so it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, crop is, for me, where India is a world leader and has closed a protection gap an enormous margin, partly through quasi and parametric solutions. So let's not beat ourselves up about this too much. We've made huge steps in developing this. There is a long, long way to go, but let's look forward and positive with our next steps in trying to develop this.
Thank you, Tom, for your optimism. I think the key takeaway from what you said is we should make people spend more on insurance. Very nice. I come to now, Tony, I mean, as the end of the first round. I mean, reinsurers have the capital, they have the knowledge, they have the products. Do you think there are some structural challenges in the Indian market which need to be sorted out? I mean, before reinsurers could really, you know, give out their best to bridge protection gap in India.
Thank you very much for the comments, and it's nice to have sort of heard everybody's sort of opinions and different perspectives, because you sort of bring it all together. One of the nice things about having worked in many places around the world, you get very different perspectives. You know, working in the United Kingdom or the United States or in Asia and India, you see a lot of different perspectives around what are the right solutions. And all the comments really from the you know, the previous speakers, all of them are actual, factual, and have relevance to it. When I think about the protection gap, I go back to a country where I was born, which is New Zealand, and New Zealand's got a lot of earthquakes. And growing up there, I used to have the school bell ring, and you need to go under your desk to in the event that an earthquake would happen. And luckily during my time, no earthquakes occurred. Within the country, the economic problem that exists in the New Zealand situation is, if a large natural catastrophe event occurs, such as an earthquake, the ability for the country to sustain and pay that loss is difficult. It can borrow money to pay for a loss, and they could do that through centralized government funding. And then for the individuals who don't have insurance policies, pay for that economic loss. And then the questions that present itself is the person that purchased the policy or the person that didn't purchase the policy, who should get the money? And during my time in Australia with the bushfires, we saw that conundrum for the government. The person that purchased the policy is paid for by the insurance company. The person that didn't is funded by the government. And I think ultimately the previous tax, ultimately the taxpayer would fund that. So the industry's in a little of a conundrum. The society's in a bit of a conundrum. And when you think about the New Zealand situation with earthquake, and that large earthquake, I think in the 50s, and similar to the story about normally when an event occurs, that's when you test the systems. When you buy something, It may look great on the shelf. It's not to really you push it to you actually find out, is there a problem with the system? Is there a problem with the mechanics of the car? Is there a problem with the with the computer? You turn it on and it doesn't work. And when you really push it, that's when you start seeing the leaks and certain things or some failures. And so when you saw a large earthquake in New Zealand, the failures of the system became apparent. And the apparent was you had the insured, you had the uninsured, which naturally was funded by the government. So the government there in the 50s set up an earthquake pool to fund losses for personal lines, for homeowners and motor and things like that. You fast forward that decision around that and the drivers of why that occurred, and there were economic drivers. There were clear drivers around a requirement for something to be done. And there were drivers really around the population knew there was a problem, that taxes needed to go towards fixing up from the earthquake, which meant the roads couldn't be repaired for a couple of years. So there were trade-offs that were made. So they set up a pool. The following earthquake that occurred, and as we may know, 10 years or so ago now, the earthquake pool funded a huge proportion of losses. The pool over the period of time became relatively self-funding. It collected compulsory premiums and it purchased reinsurance to protect the pool. So it connected the reinsurance industry to the policyholders in the vehicle of a pool. The industry independently struggled to be able to connect the insureds to the reinsurance community. And part of the problem with that was probably around the question of affordability and the willingness to provide the certain covers at a price. So the vehicle to enable global capital to be connected with the person that ultimately owned a house was through the structure of the vehicle, which we could call a pool or a scheme. And then when the loss actually occurred, the result of that was that the global industry paid and reinstated. And I don't know, Tom raised the question, I don't know the percentage around the actual reinstatement of policies, but it was probably high 90s, 95%, something like that. So you would say that that vehicle worked quite well. The pool was exhausted. The reinsurers were exhausted. I think the insurance companies were exhausted. And the individuals had their houses rebuilt and so on and so forth. So relatively successful story that all worked through and it went well. The pool was then set up, reinstated again, and it's now goes on its merry way for probably another 50 years, hopefully, where it builds up its funds and builds up its protections and so on and so forth. So when you look at pools, and another example, when I was in the United Kingdom, with the terrorism pool, set up around the need to provide protection around terrorism events, which are random in nature, and the industry struggled to be able to provide that sort of protection because another function of the pool is the systemic nature of a loss. If the loss is quantifiable and understandable, it's easier to insure. If it's unquantifiable and the parameters are very broad, it's difficult to insure because it gives you what we call as basis risk, a very broad risk, which is difficult to quantify. Terrorism is such a risk. Terrorism, and as it turned out in the World Trade Center, was difficult to quantify. In the United Kingdom, the terrorism pool was set up. The terrorism pool, now, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, a very well-funded pool, broadening the extent of the cover provided to the industry. But the pool, once again, and I think one of the speakers, I think Mr. Kandal Powell, talked about it, the independence from a government body and the independence from the insurance body somehow or other provides these pools to have independence around the coverage and the funds that are held within it. Because the danger of a pool, of course, is the funds become government funds. And we've seen that, and I won't name those pools, but there are pools where the government puts their hands into the pool to take the funds away, which ultimately are designed to do what the industry does best, to put the insureds back in the position that they were prior to a loss as quickly and fairly as possible. And the industry and the government are treated equally and fairly. So then as I look at India, I don't disagree with the comments around. I think India is very well advanced in terms of risk and understanding risk. And I think when we think about the the 3 C's, and then drought and the agricultural risks. I look at agriculture too, a big issue for us globally in terms of the sustainability of the agriculture is very important to the global economy. Can the industry provide everything in terms of the agricultural industry? Probably to an extent, but if you have climate change and serious drought or flooding, there does become a limitation around what the farmer can actually afford to purchase in order to reinstate his crop in the event of a loss. And there is a limit to what the government can do, by the way, as well. And it's the balance around doing that. And I think that when I look at the data that we have today in India around the management of the system, I look at the technology, which India is certainly at the forefront in terms of technology. So understanding the risk, and then the education and research around it, I think you start building the 3 pillars around what the protection gap in India could look like and should look like. I think the connection with the reinsurance industry, and when you think about parametric products and you think about solutions, and Tom would answer this question, or Heidi could talk about this question. The reinsurance industry, I think, is ready and prepared to come and support, but connecting those insureds sometimes with the global industry, it may need a vehicle. In the agricultural space, it may need a vehicle. And India's worked a little bit around the agriculture space, around different ideas and connecting that. And the vehicle, typical vehicle is an insurance company connects reinsurance to the insurance policies. But in certain circumstances, when it becomes a difficult to manage or understand or systemic risk, pandemic being one of them, cyber's been another, sometimes there is a vehicle where you get the collective involved and then connected through the global reinsurance industry to deliver a solution. And so I think that in terms of the Indian market, and looking at the steps that other countries have taken, I certainly see that there's an awareness in India in terms of the exposures. And in terms of delivering a solution, that's always the most difficult one. Because I think in Tom's example, it's normally got to rain before the problem becomes a problem. And the challenge for the industry and for government is to be proactive and a step ahead of that raining event. The pandemic was something we probably knew was possible, maybe not to the scale. And many commentators would talk about, we knew this was going to occur, etc. But the industry and also was not in a position really to provide a solution for that. Cyber, we know, is an issue. And once again, collectively, we still struggle to come up with an overall solution for that. And so these type of events, and I think all the panelists, it's great that and I look at India, steps ahead in terms of awareness. Several countries you visit, there's no awareness. There's actually a denial. There's a problem with a protection gap. So the first step forward is an awareness around this, and then solutions will come naturally. And India has already experimented around with a couple of those. So I'm very optimistic when I think about, I look at the cat bonds and I look at the capital markets, and I look at the general solutions that the reinsurance industry is coming to provide these days. There's a lot more capital and protection willing to come and play, and it's how do we unlock that? It's the key with the earthquake example in New Zealand, and unlocked it through a mechanism which we can call a pool or a scheme or a facility. But there was this mechanism that brought the industry and the insureds together to provide a solution around the economics of the event. The last piece of the story, which I'll say if I'm allowed, is after the earthquake event in New Zealand, there was a GDP event. The growth in the economy following the money inflow to rebuild the society was an economic benefit to society following an event. Probably 2 or 3 points of GDP growth for New Zealand for about 3 or 4 years. So it turned what would have been an economic drag to an economic positive because it was pre-funded. It wasn't post-funded. And many events are post-funded, and it causes a drag on the economy. So I think that's one of the other lessons in terms of looking at that.
Thank you, Tony. Very great. So as a moderator, normally this is a stage when the moderator gets under pressure because of the time.
Sir, just to interrupt, we have a few questions that have come in from the audience as well while our panelists were speaking, which are directed to the panelists at large. So would it be fine if we step in and try to address those?
Sure. That would be good. Yeah.
Great, sir. So our first question is around the health insurance market. It's for the reinsurers on our panel. The question is, we all know that today health insurance market is the need of the hour. Most government subsidized policies could easily get reinsurance support. What are your views on reinsurance support for retail health insurance policies where global emergency and planned cover can be provided? So I request Hadi or Parag sir, if any of you could take it.
Yeah, hi, Nimfea. So I'm happy to give a bit of perspective because I do think the question is going in the right direction. And it's going in the right direction, probably underlining, in the context of the topic, the importance and also the significance of the protection gap when it comes to health insurance. But what we've also seen over the past few years, if we look at industry data, health is also one of the fastest, it is actually the fastest and most rapidly growing line of business in India today, which shows that, the elements of supply and demand are there. So there is an increasing awareness around the need for better health protection. And also, of course, the fact that the industry overall, and I'm not just talking here as reinsurers, but the industry overall is stepping up to work, developing products, providing, appropriate coverages to help protect those needs. And I think, this is an evolving market. Like we said, awareness is increasingly increasing in light of the pandemic that we're currently, witnessing. There is room for democratizing more health in general, and I think there's a strong initiative by the government across the board, right? Not just from a health insurance perspective, but I think across the healthcare sector to really modernize and democratize it, make it more accessible, more available. And I think from our side as an industry, and certainly when I think of us as reinsurers and, in the context, sometimes global reinsurers, there's a lot of risk insights and as well solutions that we can also bring to help simplify sometimes the products, bring technology, automate part of the underwriting, make it simpler for consumers to be able to purchase an insurance, a health insurance policy. Certainly as well, think about the entire value chain. So how can we leverage technology to a greater extent to make even claims settlement even simpler, thinking of the complicated value chain sometimes of the health insurance industry, which is a bit different from other lines of business. So I do think there's opportunities there for us as an insurance industry, both insurers, reinsurers, but also other players that are closely correlated in the sectors. Brokers are one, and as well TPAs, and how do we democratize the health insurance space in India to continue to close that protection gap and fulfill these important needs for consumers.
Thanks a lot, Hadi. That's very useful. Srinivasan sir, we have 2-3 more questions. Would you like to take those from the chat box, or would you want me to read them out?
You can read them out.
Okay, sure, sir. Another question we have, actually this question was partly answered around the parametric covers. So the question, it's a comment and then a question around it. In India, we have a large middle class of around 400 million who need and can afford insurance covers. While awareness is an issue with large number of households are not fully aware of coverages, can having state-wise coverage for all houses bought by state governments, sort of a compulsory coverage with part premium sharing by households in the form of taxes, work? Further, are parametric covers successful with protection coverage supported by reinsurance?
Like me to take that on?
Sure, Tom, please go ahead.
Sure. I mean, in terms of the answer to the first question, and Tony touched on this at some length in terms of developing a scheme, the key point on a scheme is the risk sharing element. Now, it's going to be very difficult to convince citizens in Maharashtra, for example, to pay for earthquake cover that they don't need, or vice versa in terms of flood cover. So finding a balanced scheme that would work at a state level is really, really key. And one of the biggest problems we see in creating schemes is this disincentive for one part of the population to subsidize another. Taxes are a very even and efficient way of achieving the funding needs, but not always the most balanced way of addressing those people that have the demands for cover versus those that don't. In terms of the parametric covers, where I see there hasn't been really huge limits bought solely through parametric cover, as long as you exclude some of the ILWs that reinsurers buy. Mostly where parametric covers are really successful, and I think form part of the sort of tapestry really of an effective reinsurance solution, whether that be a scheme or just very large cat protection, is where they fill in the gaps of a traditional UNL cover. So for example, reinsurers at the moment are struggling with frequency of events. So they try and keep deductibles high enough to keep the frequency issue out of their balance sheet and deal with the true volatility. One area where parametric is really good at is providing that cover down the bottom. So if you look at something like the sea drift protection that's covering Laos in Asia, which covers aggregate flood covers, so a number of floods covering over a few years. The same, you can do that at the top end of covers as well. So you could purchase cover at the top end of a program against a truly catastrophic event at a preordained price and coverage. So that's where the best solutions for parametric work. I hope that sort of answers those questions a little bit.
Thank you, Tom. That's very useful. The third question, and then Srinivasan sir, we can move over to the panel, is there is a clear divide of urban and rural risk in India, risk mitigation and protection availability. The protection gap is very high in rural India. How do reinsurers and direct insurers trying to manage both the supply and demand side? Again, this is on parametric insurances with hyperlocal database and triggers may be a solution, but are the governments ready?
Probably Hadi should take it.
Yeah, happy to address. And we've again now I think some of the challenges we've talked about them. So yes, it's real. There is a protection gap. It's big, particularly in rural areas. So if I look at some of the initiatives, certainly, and I think it's clear now that the industry has an important role to play, and some of the initiatives around being able to close that gap can be led by the industry. But I think if we're really pragmatic about addressing this challenge and really closing the protection gap in rural India, we need to think more broadly about the power of partnerships. And I think this is where public-private partnerships can, need to certainly come to the forefront. And we've talked about the importance of the role of government to drive some of the discussions. Tony highlighted the importance of government stepping in when it comes to systemic risks. But I think when it comes to non-systemic risks, so whether it's nat cat risk or health, I think there is an opportunity for facilitating some of the effort that the industry and I think either the capacity or the products, the coverages that the industry can do. Parametric is a good example. So if I reflect on a recent initiative and solution that we've developed for the state of Nagaland, we've worked actually jointly with one of our insurance partners in India and the Nagaland, Disaster Management Authority there to provide a parametric, and it's the first sovereign parametric cover that covers excess rainfall. So essentially flood throughout the state of Nagaland and gives protection to the entirety of the state, and it's linked to a weather index and covering the treasury. So I think there is a good example of this is in this case a state government kind of led initiative, facilitated centrally, of course, by the Disaster Management Authority and the government initiative to close NatCat protection gap. And I think there's more that can be done across sectors. Clearly, the government is leaning in as well on health, on agriculture, and thinking of how our industry can innovate. So there is already work happening. The question is, how do we build on it? Awareness is already picking up. How do we build on it? Digitalization is gaining traction. How do we build on it to really deliver solutions that, how do we leverage technology to a greater extent to close these protection gaps in rural India, make insurance more easily accessible, either to the individual or actually directly centrally through a partnership. And again, I talked about public-private partnerships, but it could be also partnerships between the industry and other large private players, large digital ecosystems. I think of digital wallets or large retailers, and they probably have a better reach sometimes than our industry. So how can we create more seamless customer journeys to again provide these affordable products and make them more available? I think is another aspect that we probably need to think about as industry. And actually, if you look at just the past 2 years, and we follow the headlines of the insurance companies and our partners in India, we've seen a lot of these partnerships coming to life, and a lot of partnerships focused on closing the protection gap in rural India. And happy for some of the colleagues on the panel to step in and share what they've done. But that's the essence in which it's not just an industry topic. We need to really think more broadly about how do we become more present and more available and more accessible in those parts of India.
Thank you, Hadi. Nifia, I will take another 10 minutes, just 3 more questions.
Sure. Absolutely.
Hadi, I must compliment you on the Nagaland model. I think it's really a very interesting model which other states can adopt. I'll now go to Mr. Tripathi. Tripathi, this is an area of your expertise, agriculture. Agriculture is something very, very important to India. And we see a huge protection gap. Government has done a fantastic job, but there are a lot of challenges. And how do we really, make sure that the farmer gets benefited by the crop insurance? Your views on that?
Crop insurance will always be related to government's intervention, whether you like it or you don't like it. It is not an insurance which can be purely driven by insurers and reinsurers. The amount of loss can be humongous, and unless it is planned properly, it is got the capability to wipe out some companies also. Now, the Indian reinsurer, GIC, has been involved with crops since 1985 as an implementing agency, and subsequently providing capacity to the market for the Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana. Now, giving capacity to the market for crop insurance was initially an issue, but not anymore now, because the total amount of reinsurance capacity that is required has remained almost static at around $4 to $4.5 billion, which is, I would say, around 75% of which is reinsured. Companies taking around 20% retention and 5% obligatory. But the issue is for the farmer who is not under PMFPY. PMFPY has become now voluntary. Earlier, what was happening? It was compulsory for all loany farmers. It has become voluntary. But despite being voluntary, the amount of coverage and sum insured have not fallen drastically. It has remained more or less same. But the worrying part is most of the states which were participating in it have come out of the scheme, and few states are participating with a larger coverage. The issue here is for the reinsurer basically to act mostly as an influencer with the government. It is not the question of pumping more capital or giving more capacity. Whatever capital you may bring, that is not a sustainable thing for crop insurance, purely on the basis of providing capacity. You have to have an influencer role with the government, mostly with regard to pricing. Now there is a capping on overall pricing, though we are saying that this is actually priced. There is still a capping on overall pricing. I would not say that companies are also pricing optimally all the clusters that are available for insurance. That's also not the case. So the concern from government's side, from the state government side also is correct to some extent. The role for reinsurance always remains that when we are improving on the PMFPY successively on various, if you look into the history of crop insurance from 85 till date, each subsequent crop insurance program is an improvement on the earlier one. Always. It has not worked otherwise. It has been an improvement. And I think the journey is still on. Why I am saying that you can influence, play the role of the influencer is that government at the central level and even in some of the state governments are very proactive on crop insurance regarding in respect to adoption of technology for assessment of crop yield, and also to see that the moral hazard part is reduced to the extent that is possible. So while capacity giving is not an issue at present for the market that is there in India, I think we must continue with the same scheme for some period to see that what is the outcome. Presently, what we are doing is we are making some changes which I would term as ad hoc changes too fast. That is also not right for a scheme of this size and the coverage of this extent. If we go on making small changes and bringing in such things which I will term as financial engineering and not risk mitigation as such, by giving certain amount of coverage, leaving certain amount of coverage, I would bring to your kind notice one fact that one of the most progressive states had eliminated flood cover from the crop insurance only for the purpose of paying lesser premium and was devastated by flood that year and could not get even 10 crores from flood cover in crop insurance. So pandemic has also created bigger challenge for state governments to give their share of the premium. So they definitely calculate to see whether this premium amount they can retain and pay to the farmer or should pay to the company to get an insurance. This calculation, whenever it is not in favor of the state government, they will go for insurance. If it in favor of theirs, they will not go for crop insurance. This has been sensitive, and the reinsurer's role has always been as an influencer in crop insurance. I think that is the role they will play. It is definitely not going to be a pure actuarial driven game in the long run. Also, government will always be at the background to drive the crop insurance in India.
Just one, thank you. Last question I'm asking Mr. Kanpal. Kanpal, this is a very fundamental question to protection gap. We all know that, unless people take insurance, nothing can be done. The protection gap will remain. So what do you think is the role of distribution? You come from a company which has a very strong distribution base. What do you think distribution strategies can play a role in reducing the protection gap? I think this would be the last question. I give it to you, with the last word to you.
Yeah, so distribution, I'll say distributors are the catalyst in customers' life cycle. Because see, when we were talking about protection gap, we were talking about awareness. But despite awareness, there is a procrastination attitude amongst the consumers. They will say that not now, it is after some time. Or there is optimism and they try to fall back or depend on their own resources or family resources. So here is the importance of distribution. Distribution will play two roles. One is with their large brand presence, they will make people aware about general insurance. So I'll talk about any insurance, be it life, be it general, because we see, I remember that we did not know about general insurance when we were very young. We never heard about. Life insurance, of course, was present that time. So how will we make people understand what really general insurance does and what kind of risk can be covered through this? Second is about accessibility. So if we talk about 3 A's, which Hedy was saying, awareness, availability, and affordability. So apart from creating awareness, availability is also very important. Now, when we talk about availability, we can be present through digital, which we are talking today. But unless they understand, because see, there is a robo concept. So they research online by in a physical mode. So this will be helped by the distribution reach which you create. Now, how to leverage distribution which is already existing? That's a big thing. We have got at all the villages during, since being a banker, I'll see that every nook and corner of the country is now touched by banking through directly by their branches or through their CSP model, customer service point model. Government has also their CSP model, which is already working. Now, how to make them a tool for creating awareness and selling our products? That's a big thing where we can create like in a campaign manner the awareness across the country, which will not only help in making creating awareness about the products, but also in understanding the risk coverage which is being done by the insurance company. That's my view.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's been a fascinating panel discussion, a lot of ideas, a lot of things, takeaways for the audience. So thank you very much. Over to you, Nimpu.
Thank you very much, Srinivasan sir, and thanks for a wonderful panel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of our panelists who has made the time to discuss and deliberate on this very important subject today. We have some clear solutions, some potential pathways to bridge the protection gap in India for the benefit of the insurance, reinsurance industry and the society at large. Many thanks to everyone to spare time to join this event today. Wish you all a great week of meetings at the Indian Rendezvous, and of course, great health and safety to wait this third COVID wave. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Next
you.
time we wish that we meet in physical mode.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Hope pretty soon.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.